Have you ever sat quietly in your home, maybe early in the morning or late at night, and felt a strange heaviness in your heart when you thought about certain family members? People you've loved for decades. People you prayed for, sacrificed for, showed up for again and again. And yet, when you're around them, your peace seems to disappear. You feel tense, drained, even a little smaller than you were before the visit or the phone call. If that sounds familiar, I want you to know something right away. You're not weak for feeling this way, and you're not imagining it. Many people over 60 reach a season in life where clarity begins to sharpen. You've lived long enough to recognize patterns. You've learned that love isn't just about shared history or bloodlines. And sometimes that realization hurts more than anything else. We're taught that family should always feel safe, supportive, and unconditional. So when it doesn't, we often turn the blame inward. We ask ourselves, what did I do wrong? Or why can't I just make this work? But what if the distance you're experiencing isn't a failure on your part? What if it's something deeper at work? What if God, in His quiet and careful way, is actually protecting you? Today, I want to talk with you about a truth that isn't often spoken out loud, especially among older generations who were raised to endure, to stay silent, and to keep the family together at all costs. Sometimes God removes or creates distance between you and certain family members, not to punish you, but to preserve your peace, prepare you for what He still wants to do in your life, and begin a healing process that could not happen any other way. As we walk through this together, I invite you to listen gently, without defensiveness, without guilt. Just listen with an open heart. You don't have to make any sudden decisions. You don't have to cut anyone off. This is about understanding what may already be happening and learning how to see it through God's eyes instead of your own fear. Let's begin with peace, because peace becomes precious as we age. When we're younger, we can tolerate chaos. We can push through discomfort. We can ignore the tightness in our chest and tell ourselves it's just part of life. But as the years go by, your spirit starts to speak louder. You notice when your joy fades. You notice when your body reacts to stress. And you notice when certain relationships consistently leave you unsettled. God cares deeply about your peace, not the kind of peace that comes from avoiding conflict, but the kind that settles your soul and allows you to rest. When a relationship, even a family relationship, repeatedly disrupts that peace, God does not ignore it. He sees how the conversations always turn critical. He sees how your kindness is taken for granted. He sees how you replay hurtful words long after the call has ended. And slowly, often without drama or confrontation, He begins to create distance. The phone rings less often. Invitations stop coming. Conversations become shorter. At first, this feels like rejection. It can stir up old wounds of being unappreciated or overlooked. But over time, something else happens. You begin to breathe easier. Your home feels calmer. Your prayers feel less strained. This is not God tearing families apart. This is God removing what constantly agitates your spirit. Peace is not something you're meant to sacrifice to keep others comfortable. When God lives within you, peace becomes a sacred space. Anyone who consistently tramples that space, whether intentionally or not, is out of alignment with what God is doing in your life right now. You may have noticed that when certain people are absent, your faith feels stronger. You pray more freely. You feel closer to God. That's not an accident. God often removes relationships that drown out His voice so you can hear Him clearly again. This is not about anger or bitterness, it's about protection. And as difficult as that is to accept, It leads us to something even deeper. God doesn't just remove what disturbs your peace. He also uses separation to prepare you for your calling. Now, when I say calling, I don't necessarily mean starting a new career or doing something public or dramatic. At this stage of life, your calling may look quieter, but it is no less meaningful. It may be a calling to deeper faith, to mentoring others, to prayer, to wisdom, or to finally walking in freedom from patterns that have followed you for decades. Here's something many people don't realize. Not everyone who walked with you in earlier seasons can walk with you into the next one. Some family members know the old version of you so well that they struggle to accept who you are becoming. They may unintentionally pull you back into roles you've outgrown. The peacemaker, the fixer, the one who always gives and never asks. God sees when those roles are no longer healthy. And when He begins to lead you into a new season of purpose, He often creates space. That space can feel lonely at first. You may wonder why the people who once seemed so close now feel distant or uninterested. But in that quiet, God is doing something important. He's teaching you to depend on Him more than on human approval. Think about how often family expectations can shape our choices, even later in life. You may have stayed silent to avoid upsetting someone. You may have delayed obedience to God because you didn't want to be misunderstood. Separation loosens those ties. It gives you room to listen, to grow, and to step into what God has been gently calling you toward. This kind of separation isn't harsh, it's purposeful. God is not pushing you away from love. He's pulling you closer to Himself. And when that happens, something else begins to unfold, often in ways we don't expect. Painful distance, as uncomfortable as it is, can become a powerful tool for healing. There are wounds that simply cannot heal while we remain in constant contact with what caused them. Old hurts have a way of reopening when familiar voices speak familiar words. Family dynamics can trap us in cycles of guilt, resentment, and self-doubt that go back decades. You may not even realize how much you've been carrying until the distance creates space for rest. At first, the silence can feel unbearable. Memories resurface, questions linger. You might replay conversations and wonder if things could have been different. This is normal. Healing often begins with discomfort. But if you stay with it, if you allow God into that quiet space, something remarkable happens. You begin to see yourself more clearly, not through the lens of criticism or comparison, but through God's truth. You remember who you are beyond the roles you played for others. You begin to release responsibility for emotions that were never yours to manage. Distance doesn't mean you stop loving. It means you stop bleeding. It means God is giving your heart time to recover from years of strain. Healing doesn't shout, it whispers. And it usually whispers in places of stillness. If you're feeling that stillness now, even mixed with sadness, don't rush to fill it. Don't assume something has gone wrong. Sometimes this quiet is exactly where God does His deepest work, gently restoring what was worn down over time. As you sit with these thoughts, you may begin to recognize that what feels like loss is actually space. Space to breathe, space to heal, space for God to move in ways He couldn't before. And in that space, your heart starts to change, your strength slowly returns, and your understanding deepens. This is not the end of your story. It's the beginning of seeing it more clearly. As the quiet stretches on and the distance settles into your daily life, something subtle but important begins to happen. You start to notice who remains present without being prompted and who fades away when there is nothing left to gain. This can be one of the most painful realizations of all, especially when it involves family. But it is also one of the most freeing. Silence has a way of revealing truths that constant talking never could. When life was busy and you were always available, always helping, always listening, certain relationships felt solid. You were needed, and being needed can feel a lot like being loved. But when you stop reaching out first, when you stop explaining yourself, when you stop smoothing over discomfort, silence steps in and tells the truth. Some people disappear not because you did something wrong, but because the relationship was built on conditions you were never meant to carry forever. This is especially hard for those who grew up believing that love must be earned through sacrifice. Many seniors were raised to give without complaint and to keep going even when it hurt. So when God allows silence to fall, it can feel like failure. But in reality, it is exposure. Conditional love does not survive boundaries. It does not endure stillness. It needs constant exchange to stay alive. God allows this not to shame you, but to strengthen you. He knows how long you've poured yourself out. He knows how often you chose peace for others at the cost of your own well-being. Silence becomes a mirror, gently showing you who loved you for who you are and who loved you for what you provided. That truth can sting, but it also lifts a weight you may not have realized you were carrying. In this season, you may notice a shift in how you see relationships altogether. You stop feeling the need to chase conversations or fix misunderstandings that were never yours to fix. You begin to rest in the understanding that real love does not vanish when you stop performing. Real love remains steady, patient, and kind, even in quiet seasons. As difficult as this awakening can be, it often opens the door to something even more profound. When God clears away the noise of conditional attachment, He creates space for renewal. And renewal often happens in isolation, not as punishment, but as preparation. Isolation has a bad reputation. It sounds lonely, cold, and unwanted. But spiritual isolation is something very different. It is not about being abandoned. It is about being set apart. When God draws you into a quieter life, when your circle grows smaller, He is not shrinking your world. He is deepening it. In this stage of life, renewal matters more than ever. You are no longer trying to prove yourself. You are no longer building a life from scratch. This is a season for strengthening what remains and restoring what was lost along the way. God knows that kind of renewal requires stillness. It requires time away from voices that confuse you and expectations that exhaust you. In isolation, you begin to hear God more clearly. Without constant opinions shaping your choices, you reconnect with the wisdom that has been forming inside you for decades. You remember lessons learned through hardship. You rediscover the resilience that carried you through earlier storms. And you begin to trust yourself again, not in pride, but in peace. This is often where God gently rebuilds your heart. He addresses old wounds that were never fully healed because life kept moving. He untangles beliefs you picked up in survival mode. He restores your sense of worth, reminding you that your value has never been tied to how much you give or how well you keep others comfortable. You may notice changes in how you pray. Your prayers become simpler, more honest. You stop asking God to fix everyone else and start asking Him to show you what you need. This is renewal. It's quiet, steady, and deeply personal. And as this renewal takes root, something else shifts. You become less reactive. The words that once hurt you lose their power. The absence that once felt unbearable becomes manageable, even peaceful. You realize that being alone does not mean being empty. In fact, you may feel more full than you have in years. God does not rebuild in a hurry. He takes his time, making sure the foundation is strong. He knows that restoration is coming, but it must come at the right moment and in the right form. Restoration does not always mean returning to what was. Sometimes it means stepping into something entirely new. During this time, you may feel hidden from the world. Fewer invitations, fewer conversations, less recognition. But heaven is not ignoring you. Heaven is working carefully, shaping your character, refining your discernment, and preparing you for relationships that will honor the person you have become. This season teaches you discernment. You begin to recognize the difference between loneliness and solitude. Loneliness feels like lack. Solitude feels like space filled with purpose. And once you taste that kind of solitude, you understand why God sometimes removes distractions before He restores connection. It's also in this place that you learn something very important about yourself. You realize that you are capable of standing on your own with God. That realization brings a quiet confidence, not loud or boastful, but steady. You no longer need to explain your boundaries. You no longer need to justify your growth. You simply live it. As renewal continues, you may find yourself becoming more selective with your energy. You choose peace more intentionally. You listen more closely to your inner sense of right and wrong. This is not withdrawal from life. It is wisdom earned through experience. And slowly, almost without noticing, your heart becomes lighter. The heaviness you carried for years begins to lift. You sleep better. You smile more easily. You feel more present in your own life. This is what renewal looks like when God is involved. It is gentle, steady, and deeply restorative. By the time restoration begins to approach, you are no longer the same person who entered this season. You are stronger, clearer, and more grounded. You know what you can give, and you know what you must protect. And because of that, what comes next will be healthier than anything you left behind. God never wastes isolation. He uses it to prepare you for alignment, for relationships that match the peace and purpose He has cultivated within you. And as this preparation nears completion, you may start to sense a shift again, a readiness, a quiet assurance that what is coming will fit who you are now, not who you used to be. That awareness marks the turning point when separation begins to reveal its deeper purpose and your life starts to move into a new harmony you could not have reached any other way. As that inner rebuilding settles into place, you may notice something new beginning to form. It's not loud or dramatic. It doesn't arrive with announcements or explanations. It feels more like a quiet alignment, as if the pieces of your life are finally resting where they belong. This is often the moment when you realize that separation was never meant to leave you empty. It was meant to lead you somewhere truer. When God removes certain people from your daily life, He is not stripping you of love. He is creating room for alignment. Alignment is when your relationships, your spirit, and your purpose begin to move in the same direction. At this stage in life, that matters more than ever. You no longer have the desire or the energy to live in constant tension, trying to keep everyone satisfied. You want peace that lasts. You want connections that feel honest and safe. Divine alignment often surprises us because it doesn't always look like what we expected. Sometimes it means fewer people, not more. Sometimes it means quieter days, not busier ones. But what you gain is harmony. You stop feeling pulled in opposite directions. You stop questioning your worth every time someone withdraws. You start trusting that what remains is enough. You may notice that new relationships begin to form naturally. These aren't relationships you have to work hard to maintain. There's no pressure to perform or explain yourself. Conversations feel lighter, Respect feels mutual. These may be people who share your faith, your values, or simply your sense of calm. In many cases, they become family not by blood, but by spirit. And here's something important to remember. Alignment doesn't always mean reconciliation with the people who left. Sometimes, God restores peace without restoring proximity. That can be hard to accept, especially when we were taught that every broken relationship must be fixed. But restoration doesn't always look like reunion. Sometimes it looks like freedom. You may find that when you think about those who drifted away, the pain has softened. There's no longer the sharp edge of anger or longing. Instead, there's understanding. You see now that the relationship could not continue as it was. And rather than resenting the distance, you feel grateful for what it protected you from. This is often when clarity fully settles in. You realize that you were never too sensitive. You were discerning. You were never unlovable. You were simply offering genuine love to people who did not know how to return it in a healthy way. That realization brings peace, not bitterness. As alignment deepens, your relationship with God feels steadier. You trust Him more, not because life is perfect, but because you've seen His hand at work. You've watched how He removed what harmed you, healed what was broken, and rebuilt what was worn down. That builds a quiet confidence that carries you forward. You may still have moments of sadness. That's natural. Love leaves marks, even when it was imperfect. But those moments no longer define you. They pass through without overwhelming you. You've learned that feelings do not always require action. Sometimes they simply need acknowledgement and grace. At this point, your life may look simpler from the outside, but inside, it is richer. Your days feel more intentional. Your energy is spent on what truly matters. You are more present with God, with yourself, and with the people who are truly meant to walk beside you. This is where everything begins to make sense. You see how the silence taught you, how the distance healed you, how the isolation strengthened you, and how the separation aligned you with a life that feels honest and whole. If you're listening right now and you're still in the middle of that painful space, not yet feeling the peace, I want to reassure you. The process is still working. Healing and alignment don't happen overnight. They unfold gradually, often so gently that you don't notice until you look back and see how far you've come. You were never being punished. You were being protected. God knew the weight of your heart, how deeply you love, how easily you forgive, how much you give. And He would not allow that heart to remain in places where it was constantly bruised. What felt like loss was actually mercy. What felt like rejection was redirection. One day, you'll look back and recognize the pattern. You'll see how every closed door led you closer to peace, how every goodbye made room for something better suited to who you are now, how every season of quiet allowed God's voice to become clearer than ever before. If this message resonates with you, I encourage you to take a moment and share your thoughts or experiences in the comments. Your story may be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. And if you found comfort or clarity here, please consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel, Elderly Faith Journey, where we continue to talk about faith, healing, and purpose at every stage of life. Remember, it's never too late for renewal. It's never too late for peace. And it's never too late for God to realign your life in ways that bring rest to your soul. Here's to walking forward with clarity, confidence, and quiet joy, knowing that even the hardest separations were guided by a love that never left you.